Hey everybody, welcome to Baffling Cyclops. I'm David.
And I'm Pepper Proxy.
And it's almost Halloween.
Yay, we love Halloween, don't we?
Yeah, and we've been creeping ourselves out. We started watching Lovecraft Country, which is creepy.
What do you think of it?
I love it.
I love it.
We're 3 episodes in and enjoyed every single one. Think it's great.
Well, one of the main stars who plays Letty, the female lead, she was the first time I ever saw her was in Friday Night Lights, which you love
Friday Night Lights.
I did. I loved it. I don't know. I would probably love it if I watched it again now, but it was awesome.
And the other scary series we've been watching, which we haven't enjoyed as much, is called Presidential Debate.
Wow. I was so grateful, though, this last debate, we missed the first half hour. I was like, yay, we don't have to watch the whole thing.
So, in honor of Halloween, I thought we could tell 1, maybe 2 scary stories.
Okay, so that sounds good. Like
and
true scary stories?
True scary story. And I checked
got a couple.
I checked this one out with you before.
Yeah.
Before we started because I didn't want to spring a scary story on you.
Especially because it's like something that I have it's part of my childhood.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So it all started Halloweens ago in 2015 for us.
Okay.
Because you love true crime.
Yes, I'm very fascinated by true crime. Even way before, true crime became this, thing.
When I first met you, you were fascinated. And I think as the women from My Favorite Murder say, it's kind of an anxiety abatement tool.
Sure is, yeah.
Yeah, like you listen to it and it's kind of worst case scenario.
Yeah.
Defuses whatever neurons are going in your brain and lets you move on with your day a little bit calmer.
Yeah.
So you listen to Date with Dateline and a couple other podcasts.
Yeah, I love the girls from Date with Dateline because of them more than the stories. I've stepped away from the true crime thing because there was an incident that it was like, I can't deal. It was when Jeffrey Dahmer was murdered.
Yeah.
I had a flip in my thinking that it just felt so wrong that everybody knew who Jeffrey Dahmer was, but that his victims were somewhat unnamed, and
right.
I was a part of that because I still have all the serial murder collector cards that came out, I think, in the early 90s. I still have them, but it just made me think this is wrong. The victims are the people that we should be thinking about and talking about and doing something about versus knowing all of the murderers. So I stepped away from it somewhat.
Well, I bring up the true crime because when we were talking about this particular topic, I was shocked because you've talked about true crime with me over the years multiple times, and this never came up until 5 years ago. We were actually talking about Halloween. It was Halloween time. Yeah. And you were talking about how the people down the street from you did Halloween. Yeah.
It was like a big deal. Decorations and And
in the garage, they would have a coffin, and you'd have to go into the garage to get the candy. Yeah. And then as you grab the candy, the corpse in there was somebody in a costume. Yeah,
and they would pop up, scare you. Yeah, but we loved it. I was really young. I think I was 8 at the time. But,
yeah. And so you were just talking to me about it, and just kind of dropped. Oh yeah, that went on until they murdered their grandma.
Yeah. And this was 3, I think we counted 3 houses down from
where you lived.
Where I lived.
Yeah.
They murdered, the young boy who I had a crush on. His name was David. He was 4 years older than me. But, I was a little kid, he was David Cassidy to me because he like rode a cool bike.
Right.
Like we would do these call outs, just with the kids in the neighborhood. So like Rick Kennedy, who lived like one street behind us, was 2 years older than me, and he was good friends with David. And they had this thing like if a call out that you could screech in the in the air, and it was like. And I learned how to do it.
Yeah.
So I would imitate the older boys because I wanted to be cool. And
so this was like secret communication around the
communication,
neighborhood.
Yeah. So
check-in before texting.
Yeah, totally. Like, almost like, can you play or you want to hang out? But they never wanted to hang out with me, of course.
No.
So I was like a little monkey wrench in their communication because I would do it too. So I think they were a little confused. But yeah, just in my memory, David was a really cool kid, and their celebrations at Halloween were super cool. Like the coffin in the garage with like the mummy or the body and the witches, and this was back in the 70s,
early 70s,
before Halloween. People would celebrate Halloween the way they do in the United States.
There was no
today.
Spirit Halloween store.
Absolutely not. No.
So you kind of dropped that bomb on me, and I was kind of shocked. I'm like, you never mentioned that before. And you were like, oh, yeah, I have.
Yeah.
You were like, I must have. And I'm like, no, you never told me that David's parents killed
his grandma and great grandma. They killed both of them.
Yeah.
Well, there were so many weird things, like so many like as an adult stepping back and looking at where I grew up and some of the situations, it was insane. Like some of the things were insane.
Toledo is dangerous.
It was very dangerous.
That's what I've learned from talking to you.
It was really dangerous.
So I started Googling. I think you were cooking while we were talking about it, and I brought my laptop out, and I was Googling and talking to you while you were making dinner.
Yeah.
And we discovered the Toledo Blade had a whole story on it, and I kept Googling and telling you facts, and you were so young, you didn't follow the details of the court case.
Yeah, didn't follow the details, and
you just knew your friend David's parents left, and he had to go away.
Yeah, I think he wasn't even really my friend because again he was
a kid around the neighborhood.
But it was like, the thing that I remember the most about like his parents committing this crime is his grandma and great grandma. They lived in Ottawa Hills, which was kind of the rich,
swanky neighborhood.
Yeah, the rich neighborhood. I don't know. Like again, in retrospect, it was probably like
they had some bucks.
Yeah, they did. They had some bucks, and especially at that time, like back then. And they lived in Ottawa Hills, and David was like in my neighborhood was kind of like not a rich kid, but he had more privilege, let's just say. And then after, like almost immediately after the crime happened, he ended up having two miniature cars. Like they functioned, but they were like a tenth of the size of a real car. And I just remember how cool that was, that David somehow like was able to have these expensive toys and driving these little miniature cars. I think they were gas powered. It was like
a go-kart with a car frame, like a real car body.
And they were really cool. To Baby Pepper, they were really cool.
I just kept looking, and then I remember saying to you, it wasn't that same day, because I think you traveled right afterwards, and I texted you while you were traveling and said, there's a true crime book about it. And I bought I
was so surprised. I'm like, no, like about like the Warner, like I'll just say their names because I'm pretty sure he has moved on and he's changed his name, and now he's like in his 50s. Yeah. But I was so shocked. I'm like, really? There's a true crime book about the Warners? And you're like, Oh, yeah, and you ordered it.
I ordered it and I read it, and you still haven't read the book.
No,
But
I haven't.
Years ago, but I read it, and the details of it were very weird because I had been to Toledo many times, to visit your family, and I've heard you talk about it. And the interesting thing about the book to me is it's all of the places that you talk about, but under like a murder, and an investigation, and it's everything happens in your neighborhood, right down the street from you. So of course, the whole time I'm reading it, I'm thinking like, well, when that happened, Pepper was asleep at her house. Yeah, which it makes it scarier to me. But it's very strange murder too, because I think everyone involved thought they were a super genius.
And they were the opposite.
Well, I think just doing the killing was dumb.
Well, let's just clarify. The killers lived 3 houses down. The murder happened in Ottawa Hills at the grandma's house. And that was probably 2 miles away from where I live. So it wasn't like the murder happened 3 houses down.
No, the murder didn't happen there. But a lot of weird stuff happened 3 houses down
my gosh.
from you.
When you were telling me some of the facts of the killers, I was like, oh my gosh. And you showed me a picture in the book of the dad, David. And I was like, oh yeah. He, when you showed me the photo, I got really creepy feelings. And I'm like, oh yeah, that guy is a bad guy. And he was, not that I interacted with him much when I was, a baby Pepper or little Pepper, but I must have interacted with him at some point because it gave me the creepers. And
I have more info about him too. Here's the basic structure of how they were living, just so I can tell you how his parents were living. His great grandmother and grandmother were in charge of the family fortune. Okay. They owned the house down the street from you. Oh. And they were letting the Werners live there rent free in exchange for being taken care of. Okay. And having someone to call. And David, the dad, he had gone to Vietnam. Okay. And he was someone who planned and carried out search and destroy missions in Vietnam.
Oh my God.
So what that means is you would land in a helicopter, and then they would figure out where people were, land in a helicopter, and you killed as many people as you possibly could, then ran back to the helicopter, and then the helicopter would take off.
Yikes, I can't imagine having to do that.
No, and I'm just giving you some context for who he was. And Patricia Werner was, they were married for a long time, but she was somebody who was working at a veterinary office, an animal hospital as a receptionist. Okay. But she was also a practicing witch. And
there were, in Toledo, there were a lot of, witches and Wiccan stuff, even maybe in my family. Yeah.
Well,
just saying.
I think we should do another episode about that. But there was an openly Satanist bar within a mile of your house while you were growing up called the Dragon Room. Yep. So she claimed to be Wiccan, but everything around it doesn't say Wiccan to me. It's more of the black magic. Satan-y, but it's
a weird made-up version.
And just to say, I don't believe any of it. So I just think this is something this is a structure she set up to justify
her thoughts and
behavior.
But
there were a group of people doing that at the time.
And David Sr., it was his grandma, his mother and grandma.
Correct.
Not hers.
And his grandma hated Patricia.
Well, why wouldn't you?
Well,
God.
I know. I was sometimes when you hear the mother-in-law hates the daughter-in-law, or whatever, you're well, I wonder which direction it goes. But if the daughter-in-law plans to murder you, I think you were justified in your dislike.
You maybe had a little sixth sense about that.
So they came up with this cockamamie plan.
Wasn't there another guy involved too?
So what would happen is they had a whole series of men that would come and stay at their house.
At the Warnerts or at the grandparent?
At the Warnerts. So
Okay.
the Warnerts would have a second man at the house. And
Did they have like an open marriage kind of thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's really cloudy exactly
Yeah.
because nobody's going to tell you exactly
Sure.
what happened. But I'll get to it in a minute. So they kept having men come to stay at the house, and a couple of the men were interviewed after the murder took place, and they said that she would approach him about killing the mother, not the great-grandmother, but just killing the mother. And she told one person that she was involved with the mafia and asked if he would like to be a hitman and kill someone for $4,000. And they were involved with this car club called the Barron Car Club.
Okay. That
And-
makes sense because then they had those miniature cars. Okay.
Yeah, so they were involved with this car club, and they would meet men at this car club and then kind of suck them into their world for a while and then try and get as much as they could out of them and then push them away. And none of the guys were obviously like real stationary people. Mm-hmm. And I think David was very troubled, obviously, but
David Sr.
David Sr. was very troubled, and the only reason he was really able to hold on at all is because they were consistently giving him money. They would go and they would say, like, hey, can we have money for a car? Can we have money for this? Grandma and great-grandma. And so they would be able to get money from them. But Patricia hated that. And so right before the murder happened, David Sr. went to the grandma and the mom and said, hey, can I have $5,000 for a medical procedure that Patricia needs on her leg?
Oh, okay.
And they were like, well, we'll pay, but we have to visit her in the hospital.
Yeah.
And so they were like,
They were kind of onto it a little bit.
and he's like, well, she can't have visitors at the hospital.
Oh my
we just need the
gosh.
$5,000. So
that was a lot of money back then.
well, they wanted money for something specific, and it's never said exactly what happened. But before the murder, they had this guy moved in named Artenberry.
Okay. Wait,
Arterberry. I'm sorry, my mistake.
Wait, is that his first name?
His last name is
Okay.
Arterberry. And they call him Arterberry in the book.
Yeah, what if his first name was Artenberry?
Arterberry.
But maybe
I
we
can't
can
remember
just
his
call
first
him
name.
Art.
Well, Arterberry.
Okay.
Arterberry moved in with them, and he fell hook, line, and sinker for
All of the crap.
all of it. And so
Was he from the car club?
He was from the car club.
Okay.
And David Sr. worked at a Volkswagen place in
Okay.
Toledo. And so they came up with this plan because there was a Porsche that came up for sale, a used Porsche. Uh-huh. And so Patricia and Arterberry went to there and pretended they were going to buy it. And they took it to a key-making place. And they had a blank Porsche key from the dealer. They had a copy made of the key.
Okay.
And then they drove it back and said, well, we'll think about it.
Yeah.
And they left. And then they sent Arterberry back to steal the Porsche from his workplace. And then they took it to their garage, repainted the outside of the car blue. It was red before. And they repainted it blue and then had this Porsche.
Wait, did this all happen down the street from me, the painting and stuff?
Yes.
Wow.
That's why I'm telling you that part of it. So they did this really complicated plan, and they felt so invulnerable for all of this because I think they had gotten away with
other things.
a lot of other things, and so they kind of bragged about this happening to people in their car club. They were like, "Oh yeah, we got away with this. We stole this, and we took this Porsche, and no one did anything."
And they lived probably, 3 or 4 miles away from the dealership.
Where he worked.
It's not like a giant city where you're hours away. It's all within a 10-minute drive.
And they wanted the car, so they didn't steal this. But they didn't steal the car to sell.
To sell or break down for parts.
Right. They stole the car.
To drive.
In Toledo,
Ohio, down Monroe Street.
Right.
Wow.
So then, right before Halloween, Patricia started telling Arterbury on Halloween night she wanted him to go murder the mother and the grandmother. And they were going to organize for Halloween night. And in the book, this comes out in stages, but one of the things she told him is she wanted to use the mother's body in the coffin that Halloween.
Jeez.
So if he could do it before Halloween and bring the body over, that would be one of... This is how out in the open they were. And
can you
about
imagine
all of this
that
stuff.
Poor kid, like living in this chaos, like this horrible chaos? A poor kid. He was nice too. Like, wow.
But they just, instead of just him going over and doing it, they had to come up with a Columbo villain-esque plan because they were all so smart. And one of the things that the police detective discovered about Arterbury is his parents said he had a 160 IQ.
Don't all parents say that about their children?
I think so, but it seemed like he had a really high IQ.
He was a smarter guy.
But I think he was just smarter than anyone at his high school.
Okay.
Arterbury said he had 160 IQ, so he had a very specific personality.
Sure.
So all of them thought they were like super geniuses
and
because they were smarter than everyone else in their car club. So
that must not be that hard.
So what they did was they drove Arterbury to the Ottawa Hills, hid him in the basement, and then they took off, and they had planned a dinner for when the murder took place.
Right. So they weren't able to execute the plan on Halloween because
it was too complicated.
Yeah, trick or treating that year, and they had the whole shebang, and it was not a dead body.
This was like mid-November.
Okay.
They went out to eat with the vet that owned the animal hospital
that she worked for. Okay.
In Midland, Michigan.
Okay.
They went to a restaurant in Midland, Michigan to eat. And then while they were eating, he
crawled out of the basement.
He crawled out of the basement. He used a hammer and a crowbar, two different murder weapons, but he left their brown poodle alive.
Okay.
During the whole thing, which comes back a little bit later, which is why I mention it.
Oh, poor poodle.
So, because after they found out about it, guess who drove back to rescue the poodle? Patricia.
She did.
Yeah, because she drove back, and she wasn't concerned about the house or anything. She just wanted the poodle. The dog. This is the other very strange thing. So right after the murder happened, nobody found the bodies for the first 24 hours afterwards. Somebody called the house that was looking for one of the women. And first the phone just rang, but then got a busy signal because when he left, he took the phone off the hook. The murderer did, Arterbury.
Okay.
So he took the phone off the hook. So everybody was getting a busy signal when they called the house.
So it must have rang when he was there, and then he's like, "Oh, I need to take
the phone off the hook."
They were able to identify the time he was in the house.
Yeah. So then the next night, nobody had found the body yet, so they had to organize the police finding the body
because she was worried about the poodle being there
by itself because they couldn't just leave. So what they did, their car club was meeting at Tony Packo's.
Okay,
in Toledo,
famous hot dog place.
The car club was meeting at Tony Packo's, and so they said that David Sr. kept calling the house and getting a busy signal at Tony Packo's. And so he called the police from Tony Packo's and says, I can't get or she actually called and said, we can't get a hold of him. Will you send someone over to do a check on him?
Can I interrupt you for just a second?
Sure.
Tony Packo hot dogs are not the best.
No.
And I know that could cause some strife, and I don't know if we have any listeners that like them or are from Toledo. They are the most famous, and I know Jamie Farr, who was an actor back then and was on the TV show MASH. He was like pretty famous Toledoan. loved Tony Packo's and like talked about Tony Packo's even I think in the show MASH,
Yeah.
which I never liked. Again, I was like a really teeny little girl, but it was such a boy show. Ugh. But Tony Packo's not the best.
No.
And because we went there, and then my mom used to love to take you on hot dog adventures.
She did.
In Toledo.
She did. But I believe this is the Tony Packo's that had all the taxidermy on the walls. If you remember, there was one branch of Tony Packo's that was like a diner inside.
Oh, yeah.
But it had like moose heads and half a beaver and all of that weird taxidermy stuff. So you'd be eating a hot dog with like a beaver hanging over your head.
I think I have a photo of you there.
We did, because when we went in, we were like, this is ghoulish. Like it did not feel like right. It felt, because sometimes if you're like, oh, a moose head in the house, what are you? Like, some kind of animal rights activist. And it wasn't even that. It was like a ghoulish Addams Family-esque amount of taxidermy things in the walls.
Well, I'm a little ghoulish too, because one of the things when my mom passed away that I inherited, I'll say. I didn't inherit a ton of things, but I inherited a can of Tony Packo's hot dog sauce, and I think it expired maybe in 1978.
Yeah.
I still have it. I'm going to keep it forever. It hasn't exploded, but it was just something I wanted.
It was one of those back of the cabinet
kind
of things when the house was getting cleaned out. It's
like, oh my gosh,
zoink.
look at this. And so either my sister Carrie sent it to me because she sent me some things from my mom's house, or my sister Betsy maybe did. Or we carried it back in the suitcase from Toledo to Seattle. But I have it. If I can find it, we'll take a picture of it. But anyway, back to the story. So David Sr. has this elaborate thing where he's calling the police from Tony Packo's.
The thing that's really interesting is in their heads, because they'd read too many murder mysteries and watched TV, instead of just acting like what a normal person would do, they're making sure there are witnesses to them not being places all the time. So they're like at dinner during the thing, and then they're all three of them are here, and they're the ones that call, but they call in front of other friends. Yeah. The police find the bodies, show up at Tony Packo's, tell him that his...
Wait, so the police went to Tony Packo's?
Because they were still there.
Oh my God, that would be... why isn't this like a TV? Like
that's
a
why
movie?
I said that's why I was telling you, like all the references in it are crazy. And
like she was a Satanist, or at least...
And Arterberry had taken the mom and grandma's car, and from when he'd done it, but he had left it in the back of the Kroger at the Westgate Mall.
Oh yes, my best friend,
where the Porsche was, and then he went. He moved the stuff over to the Porsche.
Wait, the Porsche? I thought you said the Porsche was in the garage on my street.
Well, they drove it.
Oh,
it wasn't just stored there.
So they drove it to Kroger's, and
then he switched over there.
Okay.
After all of that, Patricia unlocked it. Patricia, like they went. I told you they rescued the dog. Yeah. So, but Patricia got nervous because he had taken some jewelry, so they would think it was a robbery.
Okay.
But the police, the guy who wrote the book was the one in charge of it. His name is Frank Stiles, and he said it was what somebody would think a robbery would look like.
Yeah, like staged.
Because instead of, like, for example, just turning the drawers over on a bed and looking through the stuff, he had, like, pulled all the stuff out and thrown it around the room and made it look like it. And he'd also left stuff that any robber would have taken, because he's like, he left the TV, he left a typewriter, he left like stuff,
and that stuff was like worth something. Back then.
Exactly. And he was like, and he's like, if you're going to steal a car, you would take everything
and just load the
house.
car up with stuff. Yeah.
So
it was so brutal. The murder is so
it was
brutal.
Horrible. So they took the jewelry, they put it in a container, and they buried it under the animal hospital.
Weird.
I'm just telling you how complicated the plan was, because it doesn't even really play into the story so much. But everything had like this grand layer. Yeah. Seriously, like it was an episode of Columbo where they were like, oh, we're going to do this and we're going to do this, which I think is one of the reasons he wrote the book, is because their plan was so elaborate. Yeah. It wasn't like a crime of passion, and it was very planned. And
well, going back to the riches of the miniature cars, that was really soon after the murder happened. So they were planning on coming into some money because they were spending money right after, because if the murder happened in November, it was like November, December that they had those miniature cars. So they didn't even have any of the inheritance at that point.
Well, and one of the other funny things...
I'm obsessing about the miniature cars.
I don't know why you're obsessed with the miniature cars, but okay. But the Ottawa Hills Police Department had never investigated a murder before, so they actually decided to contact, I think it was the sheriff's office or one of the broader about it. And as soon as Frank Stiles talked to him on the phone,
who is the lead detective,
he was talking to the guy, and they're like, well, we think it was a robbery, and he's like, let's see, they're worth $2 million. Who inherits the money? That's the first people I'd look at.
Wait, it was $2 million?
It was between $1 and $2 million.
Oh my gosh!
So he said, "Who inherits the money?" Because he's like, "That's who you should look at first," which I think is funny because he doesn't say it in a bragging way either.
Yeah,
it's just like Detective 101. He's like, who benefits from this murder because it doesn't look like it was a robbery. Yeah.
So Frank was probably from Toledo, and then the Ottawa Hills, which. It's all the same area, seriously, but different jurisdictions.
But in Toledo, you've investigated homicides before.
Sure, yeah.
I think they start you out as that. Other places start you out in parking enforcement.
In
Toledo, they start you out in homicides.
Yeah.
And, so he pulls them all. Frank pulls all three of them in. They arrest him because of the Porsche, because they figure
a spray paint.
One of Arterberry's friends comes forward and says, I don't know anything about the murders.
Yeah.
But let me tell you about this scam they pulled with the Porsche. And so they used the Porsche as an
entryway into the investigation.
The police, once they figured out that it happened, they knew it had happened, but they didn't have proof.
Yeah.
They were shocked because he was driving the Porsche to the grocery store. He was driving
to Kroger's. Yeah, to Kroger's,
yes. But he was driving the Porsche everywhere, and they were like, we can't believe it, because almost never do you have someone who commits a crime like that and then you catch them driving the car.
Yeah,
it would be behind their house under a tarp, and they'd go, I don't know how it got there or whatever. But they were taking pictures of him driving the Porsche around town. Yeah. So they were like, well, we've kind of got him on this. They got a search warrant based on that, and they arrested them all, and they took him in. And of course,
I remember that. I remember when they were arrested.
What do you remember from that?
I remember just it was kind of weird, and there were police cars at the house, but I'm not sure if they were arrested at the house. But I think the police were there.
They were arrested at the house.
Were they?
Yeah. But they were taken in for questioning. I don't know if they told them they were arresting.
It was more than one car, and it was it was it kind of felt scary to me at the time, but. And I also remember my mom was like, "No, don't go out. We don't want to go outside." And
which is wise.
Yeah. But it was very exciting, I guess, at the time.
So he pulls all three of them in. He decides he's going to interview Patricia first, and he walks in after they've been there for a while.
What'd she have to say about this whole thing?
He walks in and he just said, the other two have already admitted it, so you might as well just tell your side of the story. And she just spilled.
Okay.
So she said the thing about, one of the first things out of her mouth was about using the body in the coffin.
Yeah, so creepy.
But she tried to make it seem like she wasn't the cause. She was just innocent bystander, knew about it, but was kind of innocent and had been drawn in by these two men. And David's confession was pretty straightforward and cold, because he said they asked him what they offered Arterberry to commit the crime, and he said nothing. he did it for the experience of it because murder was something he had never done before.
Ugh, yikes.
And he just wanted the experience of killing someone.
Ugh. Oh, that's so gross.
Yeah, so, and...
These poor women, oh.
And so he was like, okay, so how am I going to get Arterberry to confess? And so he's like, wait, Arterberry thinks he has a 160 IQ. So he went in...
I'm sorry, I'm laughing, but that's
I love the 160 IQ because to me that's like one of those things
so
like a cult leader would do, like Keith Raniere would do. Where it's like
so made up.
Well, it's like Keith Raniere was probably also the smartest kid in his high school.
Yeah,
and he's smart, but instead of just saying I'm a smart guy, he has to say I've learned 12 languages by the time I was 8, and I can
Is that called polyglot?
Yeah,
maybe?
Kim Jong-un saying he had his first hole-in-one at the age of 6. You know what I mean? Like all that kind of crazy stuff where it's like you don't need to go that far.
And you don't need to tell people about that stuff.
But
if it's true, you don't really talk about it. That's what I think.
So the Frank was like, okay, so I know this guy
thinks he's the genius.
So he walked in and he said, I got to tell you, we have all the physical proof, but this was such a tough case to crack. How did you come up with this amazing plan?
Yeah.
You are a genius.
He was catering to his ego.
You almost had us fooled.
Yeah.
And so he just was like, wow, we did this and this. And then he described every...
burying jewels and...
every single part of it, even though it was like a crazy Coen Brothers cavalcade of nonsense.
And how soon after the murder were they
Just
arrested?
a couple weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't, like I said, they weren't a brain trust. It wasn't one of those things where, they had to, trail them for years until they messed up. It was like they were driving a Porsche around town, that they stole after a murder.
Yeah, with the hammer in the trunk.
Right.
So I bet you were really surprised after we had been together for so many years that I just...
dropped that bomb.
And then you did a little research and you're like, oh my gosh, there's a book written about it.
And then I got the book and you didn't read it.
I know, I didn't. I know.
I thought that was interesting too.
Yeah.
So it was all interesting, but they all ended up in jail.
Thank goodness.
Patricia has been in the news a few times. She actually she got the death penalty.
Yeah, I think they all did, didn't they?
Yes, and hers got overturned.
Yeah.
One of the things she argued when she was arguing that her sentence be overturned was that her freedom of religion was violated because they brought up to the jury that she was a witch.
Okay.
As part of it.
And she said that was her religion.
That was her religion.
That's pretty clever defense, I know,
but that's it's like...
She seems like the mastermind of the whole thing to me.
She does to me, too. And even now, if you go to YouTube, you can watch a video of her with dogs in the prison.
Yeah.
And I just think...
In Marysville. She's in Marysville, right?
Yeah, I think she's been in Dayton and Marysville over time. And I looked. There were a couple... She's been in... because she's been transferred from prison to prison, too.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting... but it's
she's
interesting.
She's been in prison over 40 years, then.
Over 40 years,
She must be one of the oldest prisoners at this point.
Yeah. And she's lived her whole life, pretty much, in prison at this point.
Oh my!
That was it was a crazy story, and it was so crazy to find out it happened right down the street from you.
And I used to trick or treat at their house and be like, "Oh my gosh, it's amazing," because it was so spooky.
And I also thought it was so interesting to me from hearing the story from my perspective is that you started with. Oh, they used to have someone lay in a coffin in their garage and jump up and scare you when you took candy. That was actually part of their murder joke. Was they were like, we're just going to put grandma in that coffin.
Oh my God, that's so gross.
Isn't that weird?
What horrible people. Yeah.
So that's our spooky story.
Well, I have another real quick spooky thing to say. Because this isn't a really funny podcast, so I figure I might as well talk about this. Now, another spooky thing that happened when I was growing up is I went to school with a girl named Dorothy, and we weren't friends, we weren't even acquaintances. She just attended the school that I went to, and she had 2 serial murder experiences.
Yeah, this is kind of a Toledo edition.
Yeah, it is a Toledo edition. So the first experience that she had with serial murders was her best friend was murdered. Her name was Dawn Backus, and she was only 12 years old. And it was horrible. It still is just horrible to think about. But she was murdered by the Cook brothers, which were pretty prolific at the time. In the 1980 was the year. And Dorothy was best friends with Dawn. I'm not going to go into like the whole sitch. But you can look them up if you're interested. They were they were very horrible men. So then 4 years later, Dorothy, this girl that I went to school, or who attended the school with me, her neighbors were murdered by serial killers. Like neighbors, like just a couple doors down, like David Warner to me. They were murdered by Alton Brown and Alton Coleman and Deborah Denise Brown.
I hope they weren't murdered by Alton Brown.
I know. He's fun to watch.
Yeah, I know.
No, it was Alton Coleman and Deborah Denise Brown who went on a rampage in 1984 across Indiana, Ohio. They were prolific. But I just thought, this is insane, because until I became an adult, a full adult, it just felt like this is the way things are. Like,
right.
It doesn't seem like it was a big deal, especially when Dawn was murdered. But it was just like, this happens. This happens. And now as an adult, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this woman, or the young woman, Dorothy, had that type of experience in her life where her best friend's murdered by serial killers, and then her neighbors are murdered by other serial killers. It's insane.
It's crazy.
Yeah. So happy Halloween, I guess.
Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast, and to read our show notes, sign up for our newsletter at bafflingcyclops.com.